I've got the right instance of Chrome open. Right, we are live. The transition button. Hello, and welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the race wars. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we talk about games. And we also talk about racing. And we also talk about Johnny Tran. And his biker squad of Uzi shooting Chinese street racers. We're talking the Fast and the Furious, the original, the bona fide classic, 2001's The Fast and the Furious.
And lest you think I was making a cheap joke, they actually called the big race at the end Race Wars, which I can't believe was a thing in 2001.
Yep.
A thought occurred to me. This came out in June of 2001. This is probably a lot of people's last summer blockbuster they saw before the towers fell. It's an end cap of the 90s, right?
Yep.
Or that era.
Yeah, it's funny to think that Race Wars has such a connotation now, right? Because of politics and the rise of white supremacist, far right, whatever. Whereas before it was just a bunch of street races from LA racing in the desert.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It definitely has raised in political salience, but I would contend that that's less because of particular events in our times and more this kind of that golden period of the 90s, the end of history type of stuff, which I would be lax if I didn't mention that. A lot of people overinterpret or misinterpret what Francis Fukuyama was saying during that. But the 90s were definitely a golden age. This is kind of the end cap of it. So we're going to talk about it. Something that struck me incredibly strongly as I'm watching it is this movie reminds me a lot of Hackers. Have you seen Hackers, buddy?
Yeah, I saw Hackers in college, but I haven't seen it anytime recently. What made you think about it in Hackers? By the way, hello Charles in the chat. I see a good friend of the cast, Charles, is tuning in. Do you have a Corona? Are you coming to the family barbecue, bud?
So this reminded me of Hackers specifically because it's this this niche hobbyist movie that probably doesn't look a lot like the actual niche hobbyist, the actual niche hobby. And there's it's not super strong parallels in terms of plot structure, but there are parallels in terms of characters, right? It's got that very kind of if Hackers is very solidly 90s, I think the Fast and Furious is also very solidly 90s despite being at the end of it, right? Jesse is the spiritual equivalent of Matthew Lillard's character in Hackers. And there's a lot of stuff kind of in that, Dom's character and love interest are both assumed or both Angelina Jolie and Hackers, right? And there's some difference between Brian and what I can't remember the name of the main character in Hackers, but I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think we need to do an episode on Hackers at some point.
Okay, I'm down to do an episode on Hackers. It's funny because the parallel that everybody makes to this is Point Break, right? Because this is essentially the same plot structure as Point Break, which is another movie that I've watched recently, obviously featuring Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, but centered around surfing and sort of surf culture rather than racing and sort of street culture. And I do think that is really apt.
Also versus hacking and hacker culture, which is I think the parallel, right? I haven't seen Point Break, so that's probably why I'm not drawing that.
Point Break is the better movie, and it pains me to say that, right? But at the end of the day, the thing about Point Break that really kills it and really works is that Johnny Utah, who is Keanu Reeves' character in Point Break, he legitimately loves surfing, right? And he legitimately finds himself by going undercover and kind of integrating with Bodhi's crew as they're surfing, right? His story is that he's an athlete or something. He's an athlete. He got injured in his senior year or whatever, and then he becomes an FBI agent, right? And the thing that he realizes, that Johnny Utah realizes, is that the sort of spirituality that Bodhi is talking about in surfing really does connect with him, and it is that bond that makes it so that at the pivotal point in the movie where Johnny Utah is chasing Bodhi because he's just robbed a bank or whatever, where Johnny can't bring himself to shoot his best friend, right? I do think that comes across here, but it is not as strong an arc, right? Like, I do get that Paul Walker and Vin Diesel sort of have that friendship, and they have that love for each other, right? But it's just like Brian himself is not, he doesn't come as far as Johnny Utah does, because Johnny Utah is a legitimately, like, he is a damaged character who becomes whole, and that's the tension and drama of going undercover. Brian, he just kind of wants to solve the case, and he gets swept up in the race, right? So
that or bang Mia, right? Like that's like that's like that like there's like a very Fridge momenty type like moment where it's like, he really didn't need to hit on Mia at like the freaking like weird like bar, I guess is what she's like, the bar that disappears in the movie.
It's a deli.
Is it?
So funnily, there's a ton of things I want to call out in this movie that are just LA specific things. That bar in LA, I used to drive home. I used to drive past it every day before I was even a Fast and Furious guy, right? Like I would just drive, because it was a really convenient back route that I could take to skip around traffic on my commute. And it is in fact right down the street from the eponymous Fast and Furious house where they have the family barbecue, right? Like when we went to the Fast and Furious house, I was like, oh God, this is the bar, right? This is it is literally just like a market. It's called like somebody's market, right? So it's just like a little kind of convenience store / deli thing in Angelino Heights.
Yep. I mean, and I'm sure if you went and asked them how the tuna was, they would roll their eyes at you and be very angry.
I have to do that now. Fuck, I don't even like tuna, but you're so right. God, I have to do that. Yeah, there's other LA stuff, right? Like the very first racing scene takes place literally down the street from my house. 1 block this direction is where that sort of intersection is, because you can see that there's like a big hangar there. That hangar is the Hawthorne Airport. And one of my favorite little details is that you can see the street sign, and the street sign is 120th Street, right? That is the street that they are racing on for the duration of the very first race that they go on, right? But then the cops show up, and the cops chase them down. The first detail that is buck wild is on the police scanner. They say that there's been a homicide in Glendale, and that is pulling all of the police. Glendale is 30 miles from Hawthorne. It is literally a 45-minute drive, right? It is the distance between Hawthorne and Glendale is the distance between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, right? So the idea that a murder in Glendale is occupying all of the police in Los Angeles. By the way, Glendale is its own city that I believe has its own police force.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. Hawthorne also, by the way, its own city with its own police force, right? And then the other thing that happens is Dom drives away, and he drives up into that little parking structure. You can see a street sign in that parking structure, which is 7th Street, right? Well, those streets are related, like 120th Street and 7th Street are related streets. So he drove 113 blocks to dodge the cops, and Brian happened to follow him every step of the way. And and then they later end up at Johnny Tran's place, that big Korean market. I think it's like TK Market or something. That's also a famous location in Anaheim, which is also 25 miles away from where they are. So it's a lot of that, like jumping all around Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, it is. So I would say that this movie is not exactly a Los Angeles movie in that, like, it wants to live and breathe it, right? Like, it doesn't want you to look at it and be like, this geography doesn't make sense if you know Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
Like, very similar to,
but it is very much a Los Angeles movie in the sense that, like, it wants to, it has the feel of Los Angeles, I feel like, in the same way that we might say something like, I don't know, what's a good New York movie? any of these like Woody Allen movies,
Or like
right? That are so
Seinfeld, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, oh yeah, exactly, right? Like where it captures kind of the spirit of
right.
LA. One of the things that I think one of the things that really powered the Fast and the Furious to success in general was how diverse the cast was, right? You know, obviously both Brian and Vin Diesel are white, though Vin Diesel's like kind of vaguely ethnic. I don't think anybody knows necessarily what ethnicity he is, right? But you know, you've got it's this multicultural blend that I think is a very LA thing that happens in the Fast and the Furious movies. And it's one of those things that like when people wonder why these are billion-dollar movies, it's that, you know, like it's that reason, right? Because if you grew up here in like South Central or whatever, that actually looks a lot like your friend group, which is going to have, you know, whatever, a bunch of different, and that's something that I think now we think about in very explicit terms in the culture, but in 2001 I don't think anybody would have made that argument, right? The idea that like, oh, actually one of the reasons why the Fast and the Furious is so cool is because it, you know, it is so diverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like people like that was kind of the era of like, this is normalized and we don't really need to pay attention to it anymore. Um,
Yeah.
Also, a thing that it shares with Hackers. Hackers has like a very diverse cast. The main cast less so, but like Lord Nikon is an African American dude. Um, and similar. Again,
Yeah.
we have to watch. And the villain, Fisher Stevens, played an Indian man. He famously played. He is a white dude, but he famously played the scientist in Short Circuit. Which is like the only things I know him from is Hackers and Short Circuit. But anyway, getting back to the topic at hand. So you are going to be our window into the later series because I am familiar with the memes and I've seen this movie a couple of times. I don't think I've seen any of the rest of the Fast and the Furious movies.
Oh my God, what a treat this is going to be. Yeah, so I think the greatest success of the Fast and the Furious is actually its world building, right? Which is to say that like the actual plot, the actual mechanics of most of this stuff really doesn't matter and really does not, come in on like later down the line, right? But there's a lot of elements to the world building here that do. Those are the important pieces, right? Thankfully, no one has ever mentioned race wars again, but basically everything else that gets established about the world of the Fast and the Furious in this movie comes back later down the line, right? Dominic's brother, who it gets mentioned in the backstory, shows up. Is that a spoiler? Can I? It's obvious. Like it's in the trailers. He shows up in Fast and Furious 9. This is part of what makes Fast and Furious 9 a thing, right? Is that Dominic's brother sort of shows up, and you see the thing that turned Dominic into a criminal in the first place, right? Like he talks about going to Lompoc, which is like it's like Rikers but for LA. That the murder takes place in a flashback in F9, or it's not a murder, it's a vicious beating. He like beats the shit out of a guy with a whatever, with a wrench. Tons of details about the world building, about like the FBI's interest in street racers, about Brian O'Connor as a as a specifically gifted street racer, which is why he is able to do to live on this level, right, with everybody else. That also, all that stuff comes back. Obviously the family barbecue is a huge deal, which ends up capstoning basically every movie except like maybe from 7 on, just like at some point they come back to sort of LA, and at the end of the movie you end on the family barbecue, right? The specific details of the cars, right? It's funny because in the very first race of the movie, Dom is driving like a Toyota, something, right? And one of the things that defines the series is that Dom loves muscle cars and Brian loves imports, right? He likes zippy Japanese imports. And the final race in the movie takes place with Dom with that huge, whatever Dodge with the big Hemi as they're going over like the train tracks, and Brian obviously in his whatever it is, like Mitsubishi something, right? Like that is a detail that remains throughout the rest of the movies. The Coronas are a detail. Like I reference that line all the time because I think it's hilarious where he's like, you can have any brew you want as long as it's a Corona. They are always drinking Coronas. Like even in Brazil, because the fifth movie takes place in Brazil, they're drinking Coronas in Brazil, right? And just all of that stuff, I feel like kind of coalesces into this like goofy but very sincere world with like a lot of like heart, right? So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that's interesting because like that's pretty clearly product placement, right? Like the Corona, there's a Snapple. The fucking NOS is like, I need NOS, and there's like 72 NOS stickers in like the room that he's standing in. It's like, I wonder who's paying for this movie type of deal, right? Like all that sort of stuff. But you said his brother was mentioned in the first movie. I must have missed that. I thought the car was built with his dad.
The card's built with his dad, but he mentions his brother. I wish I remembered the specific detail. When he's talking about the backstory, he mentions his brother, and that brother shows up, right? Like I think maybe he says it when he talks about going to prison. He's like, I left Mia, I left my brother, whatever, right? Like that it's something like that. But like that's the thing that makes these movies so crazy, is because like they pay so much attention to this continuity, right? The whole thing where Brian owes Dom a 10-second car, and the fact that they have this sort of like who wins the race thing. This shows up movie after movie after movie, right? That's actually not true, because in 2 and 3 they're like the gang isn't together, but in 4 and 5 the idea of we don't really know who is the faster racer between Dom and Brian is like a running gag, right? The credits, like the credits on the 5th movie roll over. Dom and Brian are just at this house, and like the girlfriends are playing on the beach or something like that, and Brian says, I know you cheated. No, he says like, I know you let me win the last one. And Dom goes, oh yeah, like do you want a real race? And he's like, yeah, no money, no pink slips, right? Just like honor, right? Like, and then the credits roll over them, the two of them racing, and there's no end to that race, right? Like you still don't know who wins, and it is really that like that bond and that chemistry that is the oh god. I love these movies so much.
Makes sense. I do want to shout out to Lou, because I didn't realize people even remembered Hackers. Hackers is great, and if I'm going to make you watch Hackers, at some point I'll also make you watch SLC Punk, which is another excellent movie that stars Matthew Lillard, which is the only real tie-in I have here. But yes, so all these details. The thing I wanted to bring up off of that is, like the family theme is obviously here, but it's not here out of like Vin Diesel's mouth as much, right? Like I feel like, the point's hammered home actually by like Brian's boss, right? The cop boss, who's I think was a pretty good character, right? Like I think that character has a lot of impact and depth for how little he appears in the movie, right? Like the FBI guy is just kind of like whatever. He's just kind of like a force to.
The police captain, he has a really great like voice. He has like a really great timbre to his voice, which I really enjoy. Just like the way he talks is like very typical of that, like, oh, I'm the no nonsense sergeant, but I've got a heart of gold and I'm looking out for my officers kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of like pieces going on in this movie, like if it wasn't just about cars go fast, I feel like I would like. I don't think the plot in this movie is particularly like clear, right? Like it feels like what's happening isn't. First of all, it's secondary, right? It's secondary to racing, so I think that's mostly forgivable from that perspective. But I also feel like what exactly is happening isn't super clear. And I don't know if I hadn't already had experience with the movie, I would have been able to follow it super well. Just because, like, is it supposed to be a surprise that Dom's the guy that's pulling off the heists? Like, is that what we're supposed to read into the movie?
I think the answer is yes, but I don't know if I ever was surprised by that, right? When Point Break did it, it kind of codified the genre in a way, where the first person that gets investigated turns out to be this red herring, right? Like this also happens in Point Break, where the guy that Johnny Utah is investigating is a real shithead, and he's like, oh, this must be the guy pulling these bank robberies, and he is getting close with Bodhi's crew in order to like get the information that he needs to bust this other gang. But then it turns out, right, like that's kind of the twist, right?
Right.
That it is actually like Bodhi's crew or whatever. The thing that's interesting about the Fast and the Furious is that the reveal that Brian is a undercover police officer is sort of the like beginning of the second act. And then the reveal that it's not Johnny Tran's crew, it is Vin Diesel's crew, it is Dominic Toretto's crew that are pulling these heists is sort of like the big reveal at the end of the maybe the midpoint or the end of the second act kind of a thing.
But it's not really a review because the police captain has been telling us it's been Toretto the whole time, right? He's just like, Brian refuses to believe it because he's friends and, sleeping with Mia.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where it's like the movie doesn't have any tension or drama if it's not Dom, right?
Right.
So it just anyone with any kind of story sense in general is going to be able to pick up on that instantaneously, right?
Yeah, because Johnny Tran is dangerous, but he's also like not a super. He like shows up to be a vague villainous force, but like isn't. It's not particularly concentrated on, right? Like, I actually think this is probably the weakest point of the movie is that like the movie doesn't feel like it has a ton of stakes outside of the moment to moment happenings on, right? Like it never like we are told that Brian needs to figure out who the criminal is, but like it's not like it doesn't feel like that's particularly urgent or important, right? Like frankly, if it isn't Dom, we don't care, right? Like because the truckers the truckers will shoot Johnny Tran, and honestly, that's probably a better if it was Johnny, right? The truckers would shoot Johnny Tran, and that's probably a dark but better outcome than like the police arresting him or whatever, right?
Yeah, like I do think that there are real stakes on the character level, right? Like when Dom says, I'll die before I go back to Lompoc, right? Like I believe him, right? Or when Brian is conflicted about how he wants to handle like Dom and the gang, right? Like that, I respond to stakes on that level, but I don't respond to any of the stakes on kind of a raw plot level, right? Like who gives the fuck about DVD players, right? Like it is, there's no truckers for me to empathize with, so it's not like I really even feel the victim here, and like there is nothing sort of visceral about the like one of the advantages to something like Point Break is that when you watch them rob the bank, like they're pistol whipping civilians, right? Like which is objectively a bad thing to do. One of the things that Bodhi does in that movie is he kidnaps Keanu Reeves's girlfriend, right? And essentially like holds her hostage. And it's just like on that plot level, yeah, I'm engaged, obviously, right? Because there are real stakes and drama to the proceedings, right? There just really isn't anything similar because like at the end of the day, the only thing that is like at stake are just however many dollars worth of merchandise on the trucks. If anything, the thing that really gets me though is the thrill of it, right? Something that this movie gets me, or something that this movie gets a lot of shit for, is that like people say like, oh well, the racing is really boring, right? They're just going in a straight line, then they press NOS, and that's it. You do a fly through of the engine. It's very uninteresting, lame filmmaking, right? And I do sort of agree with that, right? But really, realistically, at the end of the day, the real stunts that are happening, like the thing that is cool that makes you go like, oh, is the truck heists, right? When you're watching them in these streetcars doing, doing the truck heists. Like there's the part where Vince, he gets his arm wrapped up in the thing and they're like jumping car to car, moving a million miles an hour on the subway. I remember when I was a kid and I saw this movie, the part where the car goes under the trailer, that was like the premiere stunt of the Fast and the Furious franchise.
I think that's a genre-defining stunt, right? Like I was actually gonna ask you, is this movie the first movie where it happens? Because I'm pretty sure that it's like a staple stunt. Like sedan goes under the trailer type thing, and obviously
that is exactly it. And so I do think the action really works in the movie. It just happens to work on that level, right? And then there's also some other stuff too. Like I actually quite like the stuff with the cops in the beginning of the movie when the cops show up and they break up the street race. And there's the moment where Brian picks up Dom. And they're outrunning the cops kind of in the hilly streets around downtown LA. I think all of that stuff works really well. Like there's the moment where he shoots off of the he shoots off of the hill and gets a little bit of airtime, right? Like that kind of stuff I think is pretty cool. Though it also kind of pales in comparison to the absolutely insane shit that will happen later in this franchise.
Yeah, no, I've heard it turns basically into a superhero, a superhero franchise by like the later half that stuff goes off the rails.
It definitely does. Like there is, to put this in perspective, there's a moment in the 8th movie where The Rock's thing, he plays Luke Hobbs in these movies. The Rock's thing is he drives trucks, right? So everybody sort of has their own thing. Giselle, who is Gal Gadot before Wonder Woman, right? She drives motorcycles. You have Brian does imports. Dom does muscle cars, right? And everybody sort of has their own specific thing. The thing that makes the Rock the thing that he does is he drives these big trucks, right? That are a lot of the times they're almost like armored vehicles, right? Because he is in fact a cop in the movies. And there's a part in the eighth movie where there is a submarine under a frozen lake in Russia, and they are all driving along the ice and skidding around and drifting and stuff, right? And I believe the submarine busts out of the ice and shoots a torpedo, right? And the torpedo is skidding along the ice, and at one point The Rock, he's driving his truck, but he gets out of the truck and then kneels next to the truck and he throws the torpedo into another car. And it is just that is the ridiculous shit that ends up happening. The thing I will say is that there's a moment in the middle, Fast and Furious 4, for instance, gets a lot of shit because a lot of the cars are very obviously CGI. That was in 2006, 2007 era where CGI, it looks really dated now. And there was a big backlash against that, which is why in the later movies, it became about, well, how can we do crazy stunts with cars, right? Without over-reliance on CGI, right? So there's a part in the 5th movie where they're doing a train heist, right? And one of the things that they're doing is they drive a truck into the train car, and the truck is hanging off the train car, and Brian is hanging off the truck. He's about to die, right? That kind of stuff. All of that is practical.
Very good. That is actually very cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of it, I guess. Yeah. So you talked for a while there, and I kind of, which is totally fine. But about this movie specifically, we're talking about character level stakes, I guess. Maybe is a point. I don't know. You went for a while, so I've kind of lost.
Yeah, I don't really remember how I got on all of those things, but we did. Oh, I was explaining where they became superhero movies. Basically.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. All right. So, I don't know. No, there's
did you do the characters work for you on a basic level? Do you feel that there is real chemistry between Dom and Brian, right?
Yes, but in that very 90s way of everything kind of just everything happens because it is somebody's vision of what cool would look like, right? This is again, this is a thing that I identify strongly in Hackers, right? Johnny Lee Miller is cool because, which is the actor's name in Hackers, because the movie tells you he is cool, right? Like, I feel like Dom and Brian get a bit of that. I don't think it's as bad as it is in Hackers. Hackers is very like, because Hackers is about hacking computers, and there's like not a lot of physical component to that. They have to tell you a bunch of it because showing you is just like vague abstractions of computers. So at least you get to see them being cool, which I'll say is a big plus. But it feels like the movie tells you that these things are good and that you have to take it on faith, which is fine. I just don't know how you do it differently. Like, I don't know. I find this more and more as like I get older, is that like movies feel like they're very short and that they don't earn a lot of the stuff that they do, which I think is fine in this movie because it's like it's an action movie, right? At its core. Yeah. What is like? There's like, what are? I feel like that like there's like pound per pound. There's not a ton of actual like racing outside of like the kind of marquee scenes, right? Like the only like throwaway race is the race with the Corvette on the when they're driving to a shrimp restaurant, so Brian can interrogate Dom about like the truck thing, I guess. I don't know. Like this is another thing, right? Like, is that like if I turn my brain off, this movie is fine, right? But if I ever start to think about it as like, did he really drive? Did they really just drive to a shrimp restaurant so Brian could be like, tell me what your secret is, like tell me how you're making the money? And, like that scene feels like it was an excuse to do the race, which is fine again, but like it's just like everything feels very loosely connected to me and not like super well.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of dissonance in a certain sense between sort of the racing pieces and the heist pieces, because like I do sort of think the races are interesting as a plot conceit, right? And I could get more into them, and they do kind of feature better in Fast and Furious 2 and 3 specifically. Like those are the ones where street racing really matters, right? But there's also this piece of the heists, right? And I think the heists are where it's interesting, right? Like the heists are where it is cool. And the idea that there are just they're doing these super high speed whatever, stealing whatever it is they're stealing. That is the piece of the Fast and the Furious franchise that would end up being the piece that would like outlive the rest of it, right?
So
Fast Five.
I would say I think that's fair, but I also think the heists are like not a huge part of this movie, right? It's like it is like the cold open, and there's the one heist, and that's basically it in terms of like the height. Like the rest of like the kind of like heisty type action is on foot, right? Like it's them breaking into the various into Johnny Tran's shop, essentially. And so that's like I said, it's like the heists are not a huge part of this movie, right? Like, and the race wars, right? Like the race wars are kind of like a dud, right? We see two races. We see Dom's girlfriend beat the sleaze bag, and we see Jesse lose, and that serves as an inciting incident. But like it feels like that's kind of like a back, like the kind of like built like the build up, and like maybe it's supposed to act as a red herring, but it doesn't feel that way, right? It just kind of feels like like it just feels kind of like a misdirect almost, and not in like it feels like it's supposed to be something like they set the scene, they have this nice set with all these cars, and we get like a race and a half out of it, and that's it. And then we're off to like doing the car heist or the truck heist. And the truck heist is good, but like they're also not particularly complicated, right? Like you get a couple cool moves, and then like the shotgun comes out, right? Like,
and also at the same time, the core crew is less interesting here outside of probably like the three characters the four characters, right? So Mia, Letty, and then Brian and Dom. These are the characters that like truly carry forward into the rest of the, you know, like into like the rest of the series. Whereas the other members of the crew are really disposable. The only one who really has any personality, it feels like, is Vince. And there's that tension between like him and Brian, but even then it's pretty thin. It's pretty kind of shallow. So you don't have that same sort of feeling with like something like Ocean's 11, right? Where every member of the crew has this really beautiful sort of like well put together character and personality that it feels good to sort of like bump up against, right? Literally any character in that film franchise, I could probably just say, I mean, I actually don't know any of their fucking names in that movie. I know that Brad Pitt is named Rusty. That's about it, right? But like you could immediately fill in who the rest of that character is, and they're using an ensemble that is twice the size of the Fast and Furious kind of heist ensemble. And I think that that's a big thing that really like hurts the first movie compared to the like the later ones where that family really does come together, and you have these different characters who are creating different pieces of the puzzle, and the ensemble is works and has a good dynamic with one another, right? So I really feel it on that character level. Like Jesse, man, who gives a shit about Jesse?
Uh, I thought that Jesse had at least like a character. Like you're supposed to feel bad for him, right? But like
Yeah.
I didn't realize that Vince and Letty were separate characters until one of them had their arm wrapped up in the cable and the other one was in a car, right? Like that's the only time I put any other. I thought like dude in a fishnet shirt was like this. Like there's two of them, and I thought they were one character until like the end of the movie, because like again they're very visually similar, and they don't really have a lot of character, right? Like hell, I think even like the only thing that separates the two main female characters is the fact that one is Dom's sister and one is the Dom's girlfriend, right? Like if that wasn't very solid, I could easily confuse them as well, right? Like I don't think they're super distinct characters either.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Rodriguez is just doing her normal thing of just being like a tough talking badass kind of thing. But outside of that, I definitely feel that. Though I will say I did like that Mia is just as into Brian as Brian is into Mia. A detail that I didn't pick up on the first time, but I picked up on this like most recent watch through, is how much Mia actually like does wanna get with Brian, which is interesting because I feel like this is sort of the era of very this is like American Pie, right? Where the kind of stuff that people make fun of because now we think of it as being very dubious, in terms of like consent or whatever, right? And you have these maybe it's sort of like the 80s, right? Where you have sort of these like horn dog guys who are like pursuing women until no becomes yes. It was sort of refreshing that Mia just is into it. She's just on board.
So I think you're identifying a different genre of film. I think this genre of film, the girl is always into the guy, right? And it's more believable in this movie because Paul Walker is kind of cool, right? Like, whereas in Hackers, it's very much the same thing, but like it's a hacker, right? Like, every like teenage computer scientist is like, oh boy, that's what my life's gonna be like. It's not like that, not like that at all, right?
Like the movie. Have you ever seen the movie Swordfish?
I have not.
There's a point in the movie Swordfish
I'm aware.
where Hugh Jackman, who is a hacker, gets a blowjob from Halle Berry, and he has to hack into some mainframe in like 90 seconds while he's getting this blowjob. And I just remember thinking, like, even when I was a kid, right, like as a horny teenager who that scene was probably intended for, being like, come on, that's really unrealistic, right? Like
yeah, no, like the like at least in Hackers, right? Like it's less explicit, right? Like it's more kind of like so just for people at home that don't know, the main character in Hackers was like a kid who like hacked something, got into legal trouble, and just got out. And like he's supposed to be clean, he's not supposed to look at computers, but then he gets drawn back into this. And Angelina Jolie is like the top dog. She tells him there's like a pool on the roof at their high school. and so like, she's not initially into him like Mia kind of is, um, but she is like there. That is like it's supposed to be like a real connection, almost kind of like Trinity and the Matrix, right? Like honestly, I think if you like crossbreed, when did the Matrix come out? Because I need to like make this thesis right now. 1999. I think Hackers splits, like it has two children, and one of them is the Fast and the Furious, and one of them is the Matrix. um,
Okay, all right.
Or
I feel like the only reason we think in those terms, though, I bet Hackers has more children than this. Just because I bet there's a lot of things that we are forgetting. Like, there are a bunch of forgettable shit movies in here that like didn't spawn massively successful franchises.
No. And like I don't think it's just Hackers, right? Like this genre, like when did Point Break come out? That's got to be.
That was early '90s. That was like '91, maybe even '89.
91, yeah. So okay. maybe Hackers is like someone's like we can do computers for Point Break, right? Like like this genre of movie spawns children that include the Matrix and and the Fast and the Furious, and we could also I bet you, and I bet you Blade's in there somewhere, which leads to the superhero, which leads to Spider-Man, which leads to Superman, to the Marvel movies, right? Like,
yeah, I definitely feel that. I think that there's a real genealogy to it. Honestly, I even think that I would probably go so far as to say that there are other sort of crime-based things that are built on this backbone as well, right? For instance, Breaking Bad, right? Which has a lot of the same sort of tensions that are built into these kind of crime movies from the 90s and early 2000s and kind of crest into, well, actually, what if we took that, but we serialized it into a long-running kind of television show, right? Where it is all about the sort of the revealing of secrets of who is allied to whom, right? And all of, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like, The Sopranos is probably in there. The Wire, yeah, be interesting to sit down and kind of look through some of these hits and see if we could trace a real genealogy.
Yeah, I do like the idea of it being a genealogy because it is sort of what it feels like. It feels like there of these movies have a bunch of different kids and a bunch of different parents, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in a very complex web of, right,
yeah, and I feel like this is also a thing that doesn't necessarily get a ton of attention because I feel like when you're looking at filmic history, you're looking at the prestige films, but this is very much the blockbusters, right? These are the blockbusters, and these are how they filter down through the 90s into the aughts,
and pop culture and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and it's also because when it comes to the Fast and the Furious franchise, it is also this kickstarting thing for so many different careers, right? We think of The Rock now as the preeminent movie star. There is no person in Hollywood who is movie star material in the same way that The Rock is movie star material. He is maybe the most classic number one movie star since Will Smith in the 2000s, right? And that started in a lot of ways in Fast 5, right? Where he is playing, and we will get there, but he is just playing a completely different character than the kinds of characters he tends to play nowadays. And we can talk about some of this stuff in sort of the back half, but I find The Rock's kind of persona as he really crests into a big sort of genre defining movie star to be really interesting because the Luke Hobbs in Fast 5 is just so different to how he shows up in so many of these later kind of movies and projects. And the same thing is true for a bunch of other people, right? Obviously Gal Gadot is in here, right? She starts in Fast 4 Fast 4 is Fast and Furious. So no articles. And she would eventually go on to play Wonder Woman. They start stunt casting. Big name movie stars into the into the different kind of members of the family or whatever, and then also as the villains. So for instance, in Fast and Furious 6, The villain is Luke Evans, who would eventually, obviously go on to do a million different things, The Hobbit, Beauty and the Beast, stuff like that. In Fast 7 is Jason Statham, who was that one I think is interesting because Jason Statham sort of brings in his own like movie star persona from this level of movie, right, into what would end up being, right, the Fast the Furious crime stuff in F7. And then you have Charlize Theron, you have John Cena in F8 and F9 respectively, and it's just like in the same way that I feel like there are people who are kind of scooped up to be the next Marvel superhero, right? Like Brie Larson or whoever else, right? The same sort of thing happens with the Fast and the Furious as this like cornerstone franchise for Universal Studios.
Yeah, no, it's funny because you mentioned Statham, and Statham's kind of like he is already like a Fast and the Furious style like character, right? Like
Yeah.
Like
Because he has Crank, he has the Transporter.
He has the Italian Job remake.
Yeah, which are all right up in there, right? In terms of these kind of like big, goofy. Yeah, okay, so Furious
And he plays
7,
basically the same character in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which is like kind of his premiere actually, but it's in like a comedy. It's like in a comedy of errors, right? But he's like basically that same character, right? Like
yeah. So 1998 Lock, Stock. I definitely think that's where he like shows up. Then he heads it up in the Transporter. This is the one that I think is like huge, right?
Yeah.
Is you have the Transporter, then he's in the Italian Job. You've got Transporter 2, and then Crank is 2006. This is kind of like, this is his imperial phase as a kind of headlining movie star. And then you take that and you bring him over into the Fast and Furious franchise from there, and he brings that kind of cultural cachet. Whereas someone like Gal Gadot, I think her kind of like sleek, exotic, like that stuff starts in Fast and Furious and translate out from there, right? Same thing with the Rock, where he starts in kind of the Fast and Furious is really where he begins to go to the next level. And wow, did you know there's a Fast 5 video game? I don't really want to play this fucking video game. And kind of become his own true blue movie star.
Yeah, I feel like the Fast and Furious video games are not well regarded, especially as racing games.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Fast 5. What had he done before this in Fast 5? I guess he was in The Other Guys, which was a really great, cameo, but it wasn't like a starring role. Yeah, before this he's doing shit like The Tooth Fairy, right? Or
are you talking about The Rock?
Yeah. I'm just looking at The Rock's filmography. He really takes off as in Fast 5 in 2011, right? You've got
he's in the fucking Star Trek Voyager. That's a fucking thing. Sorry, no, it's like I'm looking at it as well. But yeah, no, like the Mummy Returns as the Scorpion King. I think it's his first like, recognizable like film thing, right? Because before that he's like primarily a wrestling person. Apparently he's a wrestling person for a long time after that as well. Interesting.
And then he's got Doom, and then shit like The Tooth Fairy or whatever. But then then he gets Fast 5, and you're like, oh, okay, well, all right. Now he's in G.I. Joe Retaliation. Now he's in Pain and Gain. Now he's in Fast and Furious 6. Now he's in that Hercules movie. Now he's in San Andreas Furious 7. Right, like that. This is where he, this is where he enters his imperial phase.
Yeah, this is where he enters his like movie star phase. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Interesting, because I had thought about it in a different way, right? I had thought that like in my mind, right, like Tooth Fairy is like when he's already burned out his movie star career, but that's like super early. I didn't realize that. Interesting, very interesting. But yes, The Rock is like the first big wrestler to make the crossover, I think. In like a real way, right? Like Hulk Hogan and had like done some stuff, but he never like becomes a movie star, right? Dwayne The Rock Johnson is now more movie star than he is like wrestler. Right, whereas Hulk Hogan was always a wrestler that occasionally like had a movie. Are
there any other movie stars that came out?
John Cena.
Yeah, Cena is trying to do the same thing.
I think he's pretty solidly got it at this point. Like I think he's like he is still like the ex wrestler, but I think he's like pretty solidly a movie person at this point.
Dave Bautista is another one, actually.
Yeah,
Wow,
that's
there's
true.
a bunch of these. Yeah.
Yeah, but The Rock is like the vanguard, right? The one that
Yeah,
like,
The Rock is definitely the vanguard, and you can tell that John Cena and Dave Bautista are just sort of following
Yeah.
suit. And I don't think that anyone else in this list. I'm just looking. I don't think anyone else in this list really comes close.
You know, I mean wrestlers that have made the transition to movies.
Yeah, like I recognize. I'm not a wrestling guy. I recognize some of these names, right? And I'm sure I have seen them, right? Like Roman Reigns. I've definitely seen him in a movie before. There's got to be more, right? But I just offhand the three that really make it, I think, are The Rock, Dave Bautista, and John Cena as like true blue movie stars.
Yeah, like you get like a occasional one-offs, right? Like Roddy Piper was in And They Live, correct? Right? Like
Yeah.
but like that's like the only thing he ever did. And like, Andre the Giant maybe gets, honorable mention, but that's just because he's so big, right? Like he's just like he's like a character actor because he can't be anything else, right? Like the Andre the Giant was never going to be a normal movie star because he's like he's like such an exceptional physical person, right? Like, Dwayne The Rock Johnson at least looks like a big man. Andre the Giant literally looks like he could be like a real life Hulk, right? Like that's basically what he plays in The Princess Bride. But like, like that's a very one-off thing, right? Like,
yeah, I think a lot of these characters, like as I'm looking at them, are very one-off characters, right? Like, so for instance, the Great Khali is just a big, huge guy who gets referenced in an Adam Sandler comedy called like The Longest Yard. I get that one for sure, right? Or like Jesse Ventura is in Predator. He's like he's one of the first guys that dies. He's the guy that says, "I ain't got no time to bleed." Kevin Nash, who I actually did not know was a wrestler, but I recognized him immediately as Tarzan from the Magic Mike films, because another film series near and dear to my heart, Magic Mike and Magic Mike XXL. I guess that guy was a wrestler, but he's like, he's obviously a sort of second fiddle kind of guy, in comparison. So yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, part of this too is, right, like, I assume I'm looking at the same article you are. Like, Randy Savage is the wrestler in Spider-Man, and I don't think I realized that because like he is so associated with his gimmick, right? That like, that like he is not immediately recognizable as Randy Savage in Spider-Man, right? Like he looks like a generic wrestler. But that's because his image is so tied to like the cowboy hat and the frills and the glasses, right? And like the speech pattern, none of which he does in Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah. Charles says, I look away for 2 seconds and Megan's claiming hackers led to The Wire. More directly, hackers led to The Matrix and The Fast and the Furious. That is the stronger claim.
Yeah, I do think that there's, and this stuff all sort of sits in a genre with the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, like there's a lot of these cop movies, like sort of starting with Die Hard, but then continuing on, like Speed is another good example of sort of like a mid-90s kind of just like cop thriller. I don't know if like, I guess we like hate cops now or whatever, but like I guess you could just make a movie about a cop trying to solve a case, and that was sort of enough plot level stakes to carry a movie back then. Because like really that's all those movies are. It's just there's a cop, he's got to do the job, right? Whether it's a cruise ship or a bus or whatever, right?
Yeah. I still think you get some of that now. It's just kind of like there's less like the thing is it's usually about a detective, right? Like I think this is I think a thing where like real world knowledge of how things work has like caught up to like reality, like because of the internet, probably, like generalized knowledge of how things work has bubbled up into modern society, right? So like a beat cop trying to solve a crime, I actually don't think that's a realistic thing, especially in the modern age, just because like beat cops don't like solve mysteries, right? Like they like, walk their beat and, deal with minor crimes, right? Whereas that's the thing for a detective, and detectives are also easy to externalize to the police force, and also that lets you build more stakes, especially if it's like a private detective or somebody who's outside the force. That's why the meme was like loose cannon who's like officially discharged but still like doing his thing, right? Like is like if you've got the support of the department behind you, then it's a little bit less stakes, right? Like doing it on your own means there's no backup, right? And that's an automatic stake raiser. If you're a private detective, then it's an automatic stake raiser, right? Like what's the other kind of analog? I guess like you could think about like Blade Runner, where like even though Deckard is part of the police force, he doesn't really interact with a lot of other cops other than I forget the character's name, but he's the one with the origami unicorn. Um, there's like just like
I remember his name, but Edward James Olmos' character.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I also think that there's a piece of this that leads to true crime, right? Someone once said that like movies like Seven led to shows like Criminal Minds, which led to true crime, right? Where essentially, and I think and to me that pipeline seems very straightforward. But the thing that the pipe is made out of essentially the taboo in that sort of scenario, right? Because there is something dark and thrilling about the idea of these deranged psychopathic serial killers, right? And I think Seven is sort of the first of these movies to like really kind of like kick into that. You also Silence of the Lambs is also in there. Silence of the Lambs is actually probably the first, like the real starting point for this kind of like, oh, we're not just making slasher movies. We're not just making movies about Mike Myers or or whatever. Michael Myers, Mike Myers, about Michael Myers,
yeah, baby,
and yeah, exactly. Or like fuck is his name in the Friday the 13th? Jason. I was gonna say Freddy. I was like, no, Freddy is Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
Like Freddy or Jason, right? Like these are the prototypical slashers, but they're not really like serial killers, right? But then you get to Hannibal Lecter, who leads into these sort of David Fincher, dark, moody serial killer sort of stories. There's obviously Red Dragon is like a sequel to that, and then you get into stuff like whatever Criminal Minds, Mindhunter, right? The show on Netflix, which is spectacular and talks about like real serial killers in the interviews that got done with those real serial killers. And then you're getting into true crime, right, where it is about like, well, now we're producing docs about John Wayne Gacy because the idea of this criminal clown who is murdering children and burying them in his backyard, right, is like that's like the thing. I feel like that is the same sort of pipeline that the Hackers Fast and Furious pipeline is on.
Yeah, I mean, I think another part of that pipeline is also gotta be like NCIS and Law and Order. Just because like that's like the true serialization of like like crime, monster of the week, but it's like crime a week, right? Like type deal. It's just kind of like easy to chew down as kind of like junk food, right? Like it's like, oh, and then they solved the crime and everybody was happy. It's interesting too because like in some ways it's also kind of like coming around full circle and like the fictionalizing of true crime that like the Quentin Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in L.A. or whatever it's called.
Oh yeah.
Because that's
Once
like
Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes, thank you. That's like a fictionalization of a like a deep fictionalization of a real it's almost true crime, right? Like because it describes real world events, but like obviously through a fictional lens of like a non-existent movie star. Interesting. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. No, I mean I'm sure you draw all these connections in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I am sure we will get into the details with the rest of these Fast and Furious movies.
How like so like I think Fast and the Furious is fine. How did it turn into a series? Right? Like,
this is the thing that is going to blow your fucking mind. I swear to God. Because like the thing that's crazy about it is all of these movies are reviled until Fast 5 rolls around, and then people are like, you know what? These car driving movies are actually pretty great.
So are they critically reviled but still popular at the box office? Is that like what we're looking at? Is this like the Transformers thing where like, everybody's like, oh, the Transformer has fucking balls. What a fucking pile of shit. And it makes $70 billion, right? Like, is that stuff?
But there's also one of the things that's interesting about the Fast and Furious franchise is like the fans are legitimate and there's no source material, right? Like the crazy thing about Fast and Furious is in a Hollywood dominated, right, by sequels, reboots, remakes, right, like all that
or
stuff,
existing properties, right?
or adapting comic books, all that kind of stuff. There is no base material for this, right? The only base material for the Fast and the Furious franchise are the previous Fast and the Furious movies, which is why it's so crazy when these details come back and get reincorporated. I talked on the podcast when I saw F9 and I cried 7 times in theaters. It was because of all of the throwbacks that like are so lovingly paid to the previous installments of the movie, right? Of the franchise, I mean, right? Where it is a movie that cares about itself and the continuity and the series as much as I care about the continuity and the series, which I think in a lot of ways is something that a lot of kind of fanboys are when we're thinking about these properties. That is most of the mode that they're in, right? When people complain about The Last Jedi, a lot of those complaints are, it doesn't feel like a Star Wars movie, right? Or they hate that, Luke throwing the lightsaber is a joke at the expense of the monumental moment that it should be when Luke Skywalker, right, is approached.
It
right?
feels like it doesn't care about the previous movies.
Exactly, right? And like and obviously, for the record, in case no one has heard this, obviously I think that is incorrect and it's a misreading of the movie. I think the movie does come down exclusively on a love of Star Wars, and with a really emphatic embrace of everything that makes Star Wars cool and fun, right? Obviously,
and I will, for the record, say I disagree with that. We have several episodes specifically on The Last Jedi.
But the core of that is, the thing that made F9 work so well and feel like this return to form was how much it loved and cared about the preceding movies in the franchise. So much so that it was re-roping kind of all of these aspects, like all these aspects from the previous movies in. But obviously that's way down the line. Next, we'll do Too Fast, Too Furious. Which I have to say, I rewatched Too Fast, Too Furious, and it jumped quite significantly in my ratings. It is a much better film than I remembered on my first time watch, where I thought it was pretty fucking stupid and bad, actually. But now I'm pretty sure number 1 is my probably in line of rankings. It is probably my second to last. I think it is the second worst of all of the Fast and the Furious movies.
We're gonna have to stack rank these at some point, aren't we? Like we do with the Marvel movies.
I think after every video, we'll just have to show where they are in our rankings. So obviously we can't do that right now because there's only been the one. But next week we'll see if Too Fast, Too Furious is higher or lower than the Fast and the Furious.
Yeah. So since we're getting to the back half anyway, next week it might not happen just because I am otherwise occupied. And then the next week is Thor, Blood and Thunder, or whatever it is, Love and Thunder.
Wow, holy shit! It is Thor: Blood and Thunder.
It's Love and Thunder. Blood and Thunder is something else, I think. Like
Blood and Thunder is a Mastodon album.
Okay.
It is the quote from Moby Dick: "Split your lungs with blood and thunder."
Yes, of course. How could I forget the catchphrase of my wailing?
Oh yeah, Ralph. My God. I didn't even think about that. Anyway, we're obviously in the back half. How's your week? How's your life going?
My life's going pretty all right. What did I do with my week? Most importantly, I finished the Cyberpunk 2077 review by Tim Rogers.
No way.
All the pieces. So something I wanted to bring up that I think is the back half of like the last like non-conclusion story, number 6, I think, story number 6, is a lot about like, so there's a couple things here, but the thing that's important that he's absolutely correct about is he talks about gamer chairs and how like office chairs are better right? And it's very funny very funny to me because he talks about gamer chairs, one that's probably very much like the one you're sitting in, and he talks about how like the best chair is the steel cage gesture, which happens to be the chair that I am sitting in right now. And he basically is like, the way you sell a gamer chair or an office a steel case gesture to a gamer is you just sell them the steel case gesture with like a headrest, right? Which is what this is. He talks about how like, a gamer chair now costs about $400, and like because that has been so beaten into people, that's what they expect. This chair is like an $1,100 chair, right? You can sometimes get them cheaper, either on sale. I got mine through a corporate discount. You can also occasionally find, like, you might be able to find one on like Craigslist or something, just because like, probably less in LA, more in San Francisco, you can get good office chairs from like companies that are selling off their old stock. And he talks a lot about that, which I thought was super interesting. But I also think he kind of veers into like what I'm going to call like almost kind of like a boomer level kind of like nostalgia bait territory. In that like he doesn't like, he talks about how like, things aren't made like they like. He talks specifically about like a Japanese clothing company that like faithfully reproduces old bomber jackets and stuff like that. And like about how like things aren't made how they used to, and then like spoilers for the end of that review is like he talks about how like season 2, Action Button season 2 is going to be a lot about how like old video games have done video games better than new video games, which feels to be like a very kind of like boomer trap. And I'm probably going to disagree with him, but I think it's gonna at least going to be interesting, because you would say say what you want about Tim Rogers, but I don't think he's ever been uninteresting. But yeah, I finished that this morning, and I've been digesting it all day because I thought it was super fascinating. Yeah,
that definitely seems like a boomer take to me.
He's also like 42.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do agree, right? Like one of my core theses from last week's episode was that era of open world, action games from the early 2010s is better than the era that we have now, right? Even though we have so much more kind of like technology and all of these different kind of like advances along the way. And I am typically the guy, like one of the principles that I hold fast to is that humans are fundamentally progressive, right? We are looking to improve upon things, right? And so those improvements kind of come slowly over time, and like a lot of those improvements are things that we would sort of take for granted. So for instance, something I brought up in the past is the idea with something like Kung Fu Panda, which has a similar plot structure to Star Wars. Well, Star Wars Episode 4 started with that plot structure of, an apprentice who is learning under like a master, and then the master fights his other former apprentice, right? And I would say that the confrontation between Shifu and Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda is a much better developed, much tighter version of that story structure compared to Obi-Wan confronting Darth Vader in episode 4. But the reason that is because there has been 40 years of innovation in how we tell these sorts of stories in the meantime, right? This is the standing on the shoulders of giants thing, right? Another example might be something like, people will talk about Wrath of the Lich King and they'll say, oh, well, this is the best that WoW has ever been. It's like, okay, well, fair enough. But if we were to actually take each individual piece of World of Warcraft and parcel it out, right? And we were to go, okay, well, what about transmog? Do we think transmog is a good system? What about Mythic Plus? Is Mythic Plus a good system? What about these different levels of raid encounter design, right? Having flexible design for normal, heroic, and then a 20-man mythic raid. Wouldn't we, if we were to go piece by piece, right? We would probably say, well, this is better than what we had in Wrath. This is also better than what we had in Wrath. This is also better than what we had in Wrath, right? And I think if you actually went down the line, most of the answers to those questions would be, this is better than what we had in Wrath. But the sum total of that product is Shadowlands, which is an expansion that is famously reviled by WoW gamers, right? And you have people coming up on Wrath Classic going, "What? I can't wait to go back." Right? This was WoW at its best. This was WoW when it was perfect, right? even in the light of all of that, I would still say that that early 2010s era of open world action RPGs is better than what we have now because of all of the reasons that we discussed last week on the podcast. But it is going to be a very, very hard sell for me to apply that principle, I think, to most genres across the board. Like, God, it would be very tough to get me to agree that most video game genres were better 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever.
Yeah, I am interested to see where he goes with it, because he says that basically the thesis is that like Cyberpunk 2077 is like the midlife crisis of video games, which I kind of get, right? But to me, what something he says is like, in order to make The Witcher 3, CD Projekt Red had to make The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2, right? And he even says that like Cyberpunk 2078, or he kind of alludes to like that game might be the promise that might deliver on the promise, or might cash the check that 2077 wrote, right? And didn't cash, right? And I could see that. I think, I mean, so much so again, spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched these yet. But his thing at the end of season 1 was that season 2 is going to be games that he already knows that he enjoys, and so he's going to talk about them, right? And talk about, I guess, some of the ways that the systems really worked out. And I'm interested to see all of that, right? Because like, and I kind of want to go back and rewatch some of his older reviews, because like there's a lot there. I just think that like. I think that some of the things that you're identifying are also kind of like, you know what, like you talked about this with Total War Warhammer 3 versus 2, right? Where Total War Warhammer 2 as like a balanced, like from a factional balance level is better than Warhammer 3 on launch, but Warhammer 3 on launch has better quality of life features than Warhammer 2. So like some subset of people found them like caught in this place where like both games are worse than the others in ways that it's hard to play either one in a way that feels satisfactory. And I think that there's a lot of that happens, right? Like I think that's like also like the thing that happens with WoW, right? That like, you know, that like some of the nails they hit on the head in Wrath, like don't evolve naturally into the current into like Shadowlands, but like the quality of life features of Shadowlands make it hard to go back to Wrath. Or you know, or classic or anything like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, speaking of Total War Warhammer 3, by the way, speaking of me crying at things that I care about, they released the map for Immortal Empires, which is the full map, right? For the entirety of like the Warhammer. This is the promised land, right? Where when we first heard about Total War Warhammer 1, and how there were going to be 2 sequels, and how those sequels were going to progressively update over time so that you could play all of the factions from all of the games on one giant, massive campaign map, right? I never in a million years would have thought that we are getting the map that we're getting. Basically, when they released the map, I just kind of kept a tab open in my browser, and multiple times during the day, I just came back to it and stood. I stared in wonder at this thing. I was just like, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. They should have sent a poet. I cannot believe what I'm getting, right, with the Mortal Empires. The Immortal Empires map. It includes the tip of Lustria, right? In Warhammer 2, famously the Southlands, which is the Africa map, Nagaroth, which is like North America, and Lustria were all sort of cut off, so that most of the map was the old world from Warhammer 1. This is where all of the, you know, the classics, the Empire, Bretonia, the Wood Elves, the Vampire Counts, all of these guys live in that section of the map in the old world. And some of these like others places were really like cut off, but in the new version of Immortal Empires, all of Lustria is available. All of the Southlands are available, including all of these different little like islands along the way. And it's just, oh, what a thing of beauty. I can't believe it's happening. On top of that, they've actually promised a bunch of extra stuff for the Immortal Empires update that nobody saw coming, but we're all very happy about. One of the big things that they're doing is that they're using this as an opportunity to update a bunch of the older factions from the first game that are not quite like their own, like their own thing with their own playthroughs, right? So the one that gets mentioned is Helman Gorst, who is a vampire count's lord that I think was a piece of free LC from Total War Warhammer 1. And there was just really no reason at all outside of the fact that maybe you would want to play the hardest fucking possible mode you possibly could. There's no reason at all to play Helman Gorst, right? Like, it's just, it would be a waste of your time, basically.
I've put the Mortal Empires map up on the screen in case
Oh,
anybody would
thank
like
you.
to see.
Oh God, I just want everybody to appreciate the size and the grandeur of this thing, right? Um, and so they promised that he will be getting updates, that certain characters will be moving all around the world, right? Another big one is they've promised different start locations so that like if you want to play the one that they teased was there's a character named Lokir Felhart who is a famous dark elf raider, right? His big thing is that he's essentially a dark elf pirate, who was on the high seas, and they teased that he's going to start in Cathay, right? And I think that stuff has a lot of promise and is really interesting. The idea that if you want to play the dark elves, but you don't want to play the dark elves in Nagaroth, where they are, like historically from and very like based, right? That you are going to have these options that are all the way out there, doing doing neat stuff. So
Yeah, that's super cool. I don't know. Maybe I'll jump back in for it. There's like it's such a big game, right? Like it's all there. It sounds super exciting. Um, yeah. For my part, I went back to Elden Ring. And I've been playing more Elden Ring. It's still a good game. Although I am feeling it getting long in the tooth. Um, like I feel like when I actually finish this game, I will be happy to like I will be done with the game. Like when I beat Dark Souls 3, I jumped back in and like played half the game again because I was like so enamored with it. But like there is enough Elden Ring that I feel like I will be good with it. Part of it is like like right now I'm out moving through an area that is very frustrating and I am not the biggest fan of it. Um, it's called McKellar's Halig Tree for anybody watching who knows. Um, it's like a cool aesthetic. It's like a tree and you're walking down a bunch of branches, but it is so easy to fall off. And a lot of the enemies are ranged, so it is just like immensely frustrating. Um, so there's that. What else have I done? I finished, or rather, the Magic season is about to end, and I have made my way through the entire battle pass. So that was fun. I stick with it longer than I thought I was going to. So there's that. Magic. I guess I've gotten to a place where like I'm consistently having fun with it, which is good. What else? Uh, Yeah. So a thing that I think we also have to do a cast on at some point is my brother recommended. I haven't watched yet. Has recommended RRR to me. Have you heard of this?
yes, I have in fact heard of this. I have not yet seen it, but Patrick H. Willems, famously my favorite YouTuber, and winner of, did he win last year's Derpies? I can't remember.
He
I've
won
given
a Derpy thing at some point. Yeah.
he has won my top spot for the Derpies maybe 2 years in a row. He did like the TCM Wine Club or whatever. He also has his own movie out that I do want to talk about. But anyway, he made a whole video on RRR where he was like, I kind of can't believe that this hasn't broken through and that this isn't like some amazingly huge thing because it is earth shattering when it comes to Indian cinema, and then it got picked up by Netflix, right? So you can watch it on Netflix. We should do RRR. Also, Charles in Chess says, did you do Top Gun already? We have not
No,
done Top Gun, though.
either one.
Also, I want to, though. Also, I'm like, what the fuck? How Top Gun is the #1 movie of the year? Did you know this?
Yeah, like in terms of like box office, yeah, I
Yeah, yeah,
actually.
yeah. It completely blowing my mind that that movie is so well regarded and is making so much money and everything else. Um and I want to see what the hype is about. Plus just like man, I talk about classic Hollywood actors, right? Movie stars. Tom Cruise is like the guy for being a classic Hollywood movie star. And I just sort of have this innate desire, even if I don't like him all that much as an actor, I just sort of always want to see his movies because I feel like they are the essence of what Hollywood movie making is.
Yeah, no, I feel that, especially like we were talking about this kind of like a low knowledge era, or rather that like real world knowledge is caught up like with like or internet has made knowledge catch up, right? Like there's a lot of those older movies, right? Like what's the big, you can't handle the truth, what's the name of that? A Few Good.
Oh, A Few Good Men. Yep,
Yeah.
that's the most ridiculous scene. I remember watching that and being like, this doesn't make any sense. That's not how a legal proceeding works.
Yep, but like most people didn't know that at the time, and I think that's like good enough, right? Like yeah, man, that's got to be a whole thing about like how like the internet has like we could probably do a whole episode on how the internet has made it such that like fat casual film goers will see what exactly is wrong with your movie in terms of like the real world analogs.
Yeah. And I do think that there are good examples of movies that do it right. You know, honestly, Francis Ford Coppola did The Rainmaker, right? With the first big Matt Damon movie. That one, in my understanding, is incredibly faithful, right? I think I watched a whole episode on that from Legal Eagle, who's, you know, just like a YouTuber that deals with like law stuff. You know, and he's done other episodes. The thing he gave an A+ to the first episode of Better Call Saul because it's just so realistic to what that sort of like down and out like public defender, defense attorney life is like in, you know, in the court system. And I do think that there are a lot of good examples. Hot Fuzz would be another one, right? Of just movies that pay attention to, and they don't take these liberties, and they sort of work within the confines of, you know, reality or surreality, depending on how you want to define it, in order to make the movies better and more interesting. And yeah, there's something there. There's something there. This is like how John Wick has to reload, right? Nobody ever thought about reloading a gun until John Wick, basically, and now it's like standard.
That was actually, to go back to our original topic, that was the thing that like got me. Like he shoots that like double barreled shotgun like 5 times, and then he has to reload, and they show like him like fumbling with the shells, which is like,
yep.
Why then? Because the plot demanded it. That's why. Fuck you, right? Like,
because nobody noticed that stuff, dude. It was the 2000s. We didn't have smartphones. Like,
man. What else have you done with your week? Have you done anything else?
I have an incredibly okay, so first of all, I need to address this point in the chat. Charles says, "Hey Mango, if you make it to FF7, the plane takes 10 minutes to take off. It's insane." So what he's referencing is actually not FF7, it is Fast and Furious 6. Which is that the climactic thing, it takes place on a plane that is always about to take off, and it runs for so long that the runway would have to be, I think, 26 miles in order to properly account for the amount of distance. So look forward to that. When it comes to my week, I have had an incredibly frustrating and indecisive week where I never fucking know I never knew what I wanted to play. I was constantly just trying to find something to kind of like sink into, and I was kind of frustrated at every turn when it came to finding that. I played a lot of games for Akupara, you know, like obviously for my job, I was playing a lot of Zoetti and a lot of Estrella, which are 2 of our upcoming games that I think I've done, you know, like reveals on or whatever. But really the game that I was coming back to the most was Hearthstone, which I sort of hated because I found it frustrating. The thing the core thing that set me on this path was we started playing Overwatch. And we were playing a game mode in Overwatch that made me feel like fucking dog shit at the game. We were playing like a team elimination. It was like 4v4. You know, you just choose whatever hero you want, but it's just team deathmatch essentially, right? Like Halo rules. And I was just dying constantly. I just could never get any kills. I was dying all over the place. I just felt like I felt like the worst fucking player of Overwatch in the whole world. And that was really frustrating. And I was like, I need to get away from this feeling. Let me go play anything else, right? And everything I just tried, I kept bouncing off of, I kept churning, except for Hearthstone, which was sort of worse because they obviously they nerfed my Control Warrior deck that I loved so much, but I talked about how I got really into Big Spell Mage, and I am really into Big Spell Mage. It is a very fun and interesting deck. But I eventually found a new Control Warrior build that is actually quite a lot of fun and pretty good. And so I started playing that, but it is not as sort of insane as the original Control Warrior was, the one that had just picked up this big blast of nerfs, right? Oh, excuse me. And so then I was losing games in Hearthstone, and I was just like, man, this fucking sucks. I hate it here. I was getting like even more frustrated or whatever. Until eventually I just kind of like got past that very frustrated game feeling, and I was playing Overwatch and Hearthstone again without too much trouble. The Overwatch mode that we have started playing a lot of, by the way, is called 3v3. It's like 3v3. God, team elimination or something, which is a very unique game mode for Overwatch. Essentially what it is it is three teams competing, uh and when you and it is a best of 3 like rounds, right? But when you win on a hero, that hero gets locked away, so you can't just lock the same heroes every round, right? So there's actually a lot of sort of mind games around what heroes are you picking, right? And when are you popping out, with these heroes. Famously, Pharah is really insane in this mode because there are some comps that Pharah just auto kills for free, right? If the enemy team isn't carrying like a Soldier, McCree, Ashe, Widowmaker, right? Like any of these sort of hit scan heroes, like what the fuck is a Junkrat gonna do against a Pharah? She's just gonna be in the air the entire time. She's gonna be plinking away with these rockets. That's just like the end of the story. And so there's all of these strategies and mind games that kind of like roll around that. And what are the heroes you're playing into any individual round, right? Like one of the things that we realized was playing Pharah into a loss felt good, right? Like I'm sorry, into a win. When we win, we play Pharah the next round because it creates this momentum. Yeah, and if you can get the 2 rounds on the whatever the first round is, and then on Pharah, it feels really easy to kind of like clinch out that third round. But it's a really interesting dynamic, and it honestly is probably more fun than the like geared for 6v6 mode that like Overwatch is sort of designed for. Just because like, characters that have sustain are really useful. Roadhog is a really powerful hero in that, right? Like in conventional Overwatch, Roadhog, his whole thing is he can punish positioning, right? That he is a big beefy tank, but he's not really going to do the sort of tank stuff that like Orisa or Reinhardt are doing. He's not really going to do the dive stuff that like Winston or D.Va or Wrecking Ball are going to do. The big thing that Roadhog adds to your team is the ability to catch someone out of position and turn, whatever fight into a 6v5, right? And he's insanely good in this, but like it is less for the catch potential and more just from the fact that he can heal half his HP every 10 seconds, right? And just being able to sustain over time. Even if he's just landing little pot shots with like his secondary fire on that whatever the shredder gun
The
thing
shrapnel
that
gun,
he had.
yeah.
Yeah, like eventually he'll win on that basis, right? Especially because it's hard to take pot shots against him because if you pop out of cover, right, he can just yank you for
get
for
hooked,
kind of a
yeah.
burst combo sort of thing, right? And there's a lot of that kind of stuff just for a bunch of different characters, right? Reaper is really powerful in this mode because he can really chew through a lot of these sort of ground level characters just in a couple of shots. And his ability to position around the map is really powerful and interesting, right? Moira, who is famously the worst support in like conventional Overwatch, is actually really powerful in this version of Overwatch. Not just because like she has access to heal, but she has access to a really powerful defensive called Fade, where she can just zap out of reality for a second, allowing her to dodge damage. It's sort of like Reaper's kind of cloak form, but she also goes invisible for the duration. So there's a lot of like juke potential stuff like that. And it's just a really interesting mode, and it has been a very interesting mode. And I'm weirdly into it. It feels very strange that like WoW is the game that I am playing the least. Oh my god, I got AOTC. I forgot about that. I got AOTC this weekend.
Congrats.
playing with people. Um, yeah. Honestly, I quite like the jailer fight. I'm sure we'll talk about this in the not too distant future. I quite like the jailer fight, and it might be my favorite of the end boss fights in Shadowlands. Because I famously did not like Denathrius. I thought Sylvanas was okay. I also sort of think, I also sort of think that the jailer is okay, probably worse than N'Zoth was in 8.3, but better than most of the a lot of the other end bosses. He's top 2 or 3 for me up there. So yeah, it's weird. It is weird that WoW, which is the thing that we talk so much about on the podcast, um, is not is so far below what I'm looking to play at the moment.
Yeah. So the other things I gotta contribute is I started Rise of Endymion, which is the third book in the Hyperion Cantos. Very good. I'm going to recommend that again, just because I'm only partway through Rise of Endymion. And I still think it's great. And the other thing, something I want to talk about WoW very briefly is I have been engaging with the WoW auction house market a lot more, just because I used to just kind of undercut and sell whatever stuff I pulled out, but now I've started engaging with the market a little bit more clearly now. And part of that is there's just the numbers on this market as compared to a real stock market, right? It's I'm oh, there's few enough things here and I've got enough gold that I can be a market maker in some places, right? So right now I'm just constantly buying and relisting Nightshade just because I have enough of it. And so I'm I'm trying to force this because I've got I think I've got close to 4,000 Nightshade. That's I'm trying to force it this higher price because I want to make back that money, and I've already sunk 50,000 gold into it, which not a ton of money for all things considered, but that's a fifth of all the gold I have right now, and so it's I'm just constantly trying to, because it's selling somewhere I'm trying to sell at 25 gold and the equilibrium seems to be around 18. So I'm just constantly churning that, trying to keep that up. And if
hey, it is a good herb to do it with, right? Because it is used for all of the flasks or whatever. The secret to cornering a market is essentially you need demand to be high enough that you can constantly pull off the bottom end of the supply, and for every for every 18 gold Nightshade you buy, you are selling a 25 gold Nightshade in return, right?
yeah.
The danger of trying to corner a market is you are buying too much at below that margin, and you start losing money on that prospect. I've definitely done a lot of that with legendaries over the course of the season. I mean, I have weirdly made. I mean, I've made a gazillion. I've gold capped a ton of times at this point off of
There's a gold
the
cap?
legendary. Yeah, so any individual character can only have like 9,999,000
Really?
gold or whatever the number is, right? Yeah. So yeah, there are times where I just can't get any more gold on Baron, so I have to send 1,000,000 gold to another one of my characters just to kind of hold it, right? And I am now at, I think, 16 million is the number. Yeah, I'm at 16.1 million gold, and I have sort of stopped really engaging. I have my stock, I'm still sitting on a big stock of legendaries, and I just sort of relist them every day, but I'm not doing all the undercut games I used to. I'm not really building new legendaries to sell for whatever the margins are, just because the time. Who has the time when you got 16 million gold?
Yeah, no, my big thing is I buy Mog, right? But I also bargain hunt Mog. It's like earlier today I got a piece of Mog for 25 gold, which is unheard of at this point for me. Minimums are about 1,000 for me at this
Oh
point.
wow.
I've bought out all the cheap stock,
Yeah.
so but Mog is a very weird market because everything's very highly individualized, right? And also there's not a lot of movement there. So if you're patient, people will get frustrated and be I'm relisting this for 500 gold. I'm yes, now it's mine. Or occasionally people will put a bid price instead of just a buyout price on it, and it'll be oh, I'll put the bid price at 300 and the buyout at 1,000, right? And then I'll just bid 300, and without exception I will win that auction just because no one really seems to be hunting Mog, at least on our server, at least to the same degree that I am.
Yeah, one of the nice things about our server is that it is so small that it's pretty effortless to sort of pick this shit up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's everything with my week. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Well, if you'd like to email us about anything we talked about this podcast, you can reach us at somedirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast at somedirtsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somedirtsplaygames where these go out live. We've got a Patreon. We're on every podcast service. Feel free to rate and review us. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything else you're looking to promote?
I don't. I have a little bit to promote. This week I will be playing a little bit of Absolute Tactics, right? One of our upcoming games. It is a tactics RPG. I'm going to be playing that on the Akupara game stream, so twitch.tv/Akupara games. And it is also movie night, where the Akupara Games Discord votes on what are the movies, and this week I dodged a bullet because of the movies that went up for voting, it was The Road to El Dorado, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Song of the Sea, and Morbius. And these motherfuckers wanted me to buy Morbius so bad. But luckily there was a tie between Morbius and The Road to El Dorado, so I have mercifully been granted reprieve from having to show Morbius as an Akupara Games movie night movie. And we're gonna be doing that at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Also, just because I noticed it as we were loading in, you can get Gone Viral as part of like Prime gaming thing, and that's a game that I hardly recommend. With less, obviously Buddy's my friend and Buddy works for Akupara, but I recommend it with as much independence as that implies. So
Yeah, there's a small thing in there. If anybody is looking to use, Gone Viral has a bunch of Twitch functionality, like direct Twitch integration. That stuff is only in the Steam version of the game. But if you send me an email about it, or like ping me on Discord about it,
wait, are you telling me
out.
that Gone Viral's Twitch functionality doesn't work with the Twitch copy of the game?
Yeah, basically. Well, the Twitch copy of the game is. So it's about how the integration is built. It's a very dumb, complicated like development answer. When oh god, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this stuff. I'll just
you know what? Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is a perfectly good reason for it, but on its face, that is ridiculous. You understand that, right? Like the Twitch.
No, I do. I get it. I get it, buddy. Let me tell you, I fucking get it. It's funny. Okay.
All right. Well, before I cause Buddy any HR problems, we're going to sign off. I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.